The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty mercantile in St. Joe, Missouri, and Zelda Durant's trembling hands gripped the edge of the window frame so tightly her knuckles turned white as bleached cotton. She had traveled 2,000 miles from Boston to marry a stranger, a man named Daniel Peterson, who had answered her desperate advertisement with promises of a home and security. What he had not promised was kindness, and Zelda did not expect any. Her father had been cruel. Her uncle who took her in after her parents died had been worse. The foreman at the textile mill where she had worked 16 hours a day had hands that wandered and a temper that left bruises. Men, in her 21 years of experience, were creatures to be feared and endured, not trusted. The year was 1879, and spring had just begun to warm the Missouri soil. Zelda stepped down from the coach on legs that threatened to buckle beneath her worn traveling dress. The fabric had once been a respectable navy blue, but years of washing and mending had faded it to the color of old slate. She carried everything she owned in a single carpet bag that had belonged to her mother. The town of St. Joe sprawled along the Missouri River, a jumping-off point for westward travelers and a hub of cattle trading. The main street bustled with activity even at 4 in the afternoon. Cowboys drove cattle through the muddy thoroughfare. Women in calico dresses hurried between shops. The air smelled of horse manure, wood smoke, and the yeasty scent of fresh bread from somewhere nearby. Zelda's chest constricted. She scanned the crowd for a man who might be Daniel Peterson. All she knew was that he was a cattle rancher who needed a wife to help run his household. His letters had been brief and businesslike, revealing nothing of his character or temperament. She had written back with equal reserve, careful not to say anything that might anger him before they even met. "Miss Durant." The voice came from behind her, deep and hesitant. Zelda spun around and nearly dropped her bag. The man standing before her was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block the afternoon sun. He wore dusty denim trousers, scuffed leather boots, and a faded work shirt that had seen better days. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but she could see strong features, a jaw dark with several days' stubble, and eyes the color of summer sage. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps 28 or 29. "I am Zelda Durant," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. She dropped her gaze to the ground, a habit born from years of learning not to make eye contact with men who might take it as defiance or invitation. "Daniel Peterson," he said, and she heard him clear his throat. "I am pleased to meet you, Miss Durant. Was your journey tolerable?" The gentleness in his tone surprised her so much that her eyes flicked up to his face before she caught herself and looked down again. No man had ever asked about her comfort before. "It was long," she managed, "but I am here safely." "That is good." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, and Zelda realized with astonishment that he seemed as nervous as she felt. "I have a wagon ready. The ranch is about an hour's ride from town. I thought perhaps you might like to have supper first or rest a bit if you need." Zelda's breath caught. He was offering her choices, asking what she wanted. Her mind scrambled to understand this unexpected development. "Whatever pleases you," she said automatically, the response that had kept her safest in the past. Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Miss Durant, I asked what would please you. You have been traveling for days. You must have a preference." She risked another glance at his face. His expression was not angry or impatient. If anything, he looked concerned, his brow furrowed slightly as he studied her. "I could eat something," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "If that would be acceptable." "Of course it is acceptable," he said, and his tone carried such genuine warmth that Zelda felt a strange tightness in her throat. "The hotel restaurant serves a decent meal. Would you allow me to carry your bag?" Before she could respond, he reached for her carpet bag, but the movement was slow and telegraphed, giving her plenty of time to see it coming. Not like her uncle, who would snatch things from her hands with sudden violence. Not like the foreman whose grabs always turned into something worse. Zelda released the bag and followed Daniel across the street toward a two-story building with a painted sign that read Patty House Hotel. She walked a few steps behind him, as she had been taught, but he noticed and slowed his pace to walk beside her instead. "I hope the room I prepared at the ranch will suit you," he said as they navigated around a puddle left by yesterday's rain. "It is not fancy, but the bed is comfortable, and there is a good window that catches the morning light. If you need anything different, you just have to tell me." Zelda's hands began to shake. She clasped them together to hide the tremor. This had to be some kind of trick. Men did not speak this way to women they had power over. They did not ask about preferences or offer to make changes. They commanded and expected obedience. The restaurant was clean and moderately busy. Daniel guided her to a table near the window and held out her chair. When she sat, he took the seat across from her rather than beside her, giving her space. A woman in a white apron approached to take their order. "What sounds good to you?" Daniel asked, pushing the handwritten menu toward Zelda. She stared at it, the words blurring together. When was the last time someone had asked her what she wanted to eat? At the mill, she had eaten whatever cheap food she could afford. At her uncle's house, she had eaten scraps after the men finished. "I do not know," she whispered. "The chicken is very good here," Daniel said easily, "and they make fine biscuits, but the beef stew is also worth having if you prefer something heartier." "The chicken," Zelda heard herself say. "Please." "2 chicken dinners," Daniel told the woman, who nodded and bustled away. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Zelda kept her eyes fixed on her folded hands. She could feel Daniel looking at her, and she braced herself for demands or questions or anger at her awkwardness. "Miss Durant," he said finally, and she flinched despite herself. "I want you to know that you are safe here. I understand this situation must be frightening for you, marrying a stranger and coming to a place you have never been. I want to help you feel comfortable, not add to your worries." The tightness in Zelda's throat grew worse. She blinked rapidly against the sting in her eyes. "Thank you," she managed. "I also want you to know that we do not have to marry right away," Daniel continued, his voice still impossibly gentle. "I thought perhaps you would like some time to settle in, to see if the arrangement suits you. The ranch has a small guest room where you can stay for as long as you need. No obligations. If you decide this is not what you want, I will pay for your passage back to Boston or anywhere else you wish to go." That was when the first tear slipped down Zelda's cheek. She ducked her head, mortified, and tried to wipe it away quickly before he saw. But more tears followed, and then she was crying in earnest, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs that she tried desperately to suppress. "Miss Durant." "Zelda." Daniel's chair scraped against the floor. A moment later, a clean handkerchief appeared in her field of vision, held out in an open palm, not thrust at her demandingly. "Please, I did not mean to upset you. Whatever I said wrong, I apologize." "You did not say anything wrong," Zelda gasped out between sobs. She took the handkerchief and pressed it to her face, breathing in the scent of soap and sunshine. "You are being kind. I did not expect kindness." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. When she realized what she had admitted, fresh horror washed over her. She had revealed weakness, and weakness always brought punishment, but Daniel did not laugh or sneer. He returned to his seat and waited quietly while she composed herself. When she finally looked up, his expression was somber. "I am sorry that kindness is unexpected for you," he said. Whatever you experienced before, it will not happen here. I give you my word." Zelda wanted to believe him. The wanting was so fierce it scared her. The food arrived and they ate in a silence that felt less oppressive than before. The chicken was tender and seasoned with herbs. The biscuits were fluffy and served with fresh butter. Zelda could not remember the last time she had eaten food this good. She tried to eat slowly to mind her manners, but her stomach was growling with hunger she had grown so accustomed to ignoring. "Eat as much as you want," Daniel said, as if reading her thoughts. "And we can order more if you are still hungry." By the time they finished, dusk was beginning to settle over the town. Daniel paid for the meal and collected her bag again. Outside, he led her to a sturdy-looking wagon hitched to 2 horses. He placed her bag in the back, then offered his hand to help her up to the bench seat. Zelda hesitated. Taking his hand meant touching him, but refusing might anger him. She placed her fingers lightly on his palm, ready to jerk away if his grip turned painful. Instead, his hand closed around hers with firm gentleness, and he steadied her as she climbed up. The calluses on his palm spoke of hard work. His touch was warm. He released her hand as soon as she was seated and walked around to climb up on the other side. He took up the reins and clicked his tongue to the horses, and they began to move. The road out of St. Joe wound through farmland and patches of oak and cottonwood trees. The spring evening was beautiful, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold. Meadowlarks sang from fence posts. The air smelled green and alive. "The ranch is called the Double P," Daniel said as they drove. "It was my father's before he died 3 years ago. I have been running it since then with the help of a few hired men. We run about 300 head of cattle, mostly Herefords. It is a good living, but the work is hard." Zelda nodded, unsure what to say. "I should tell you why I sent for a wife," Daniel continued, his eyes on the road ahead. "I am not good with words, and I know my letters were not much to go on. The truth is, the ranch needs a woman's touch. I can manage the cattle and the land, but the house has fallen into disrepair. I eat cold beans more often than not because I cannot cook worth a damn. I am sorry, excuse my language. I can cook," Zelda offered, "and clean and mend. I worked in a textile mill for 3 years. I know how to sew." "That is good," Daniel said, "but I want to be clear. I am not looking for a servant, I am looking for a partner. Someone to share the work and the decisions. Someone to build a life with." The concept was so foreign to Zelda that she could barely grasp it. Partnership implied equality, and nothing in her life had ever been equal. The ranch came into view as full darkness fell. Lantern light glowed from the windows of a single-story house built of sturdy timber. A barn and several outbuildings loomed in the shadows beyond. As they drew closer, Zelda could see that the house needed paint and the front porch sagged slightly on one side, but the structure looked solid. Daniel brought the wagon to a stop near the front door and jumped down. Again, he came around to help her descend, his hand steady and impersonal. He collected her bag and led her inside. The interior of the house was exactly what he had described, functional but neglected. The main room held a large fireplace, a worn sofa, and a table with mismatched chairs. Dirty dishes sat stacked on a counter near a cast-iron stove. The floor needed sweeping. "I know it is not much," Daniel said, and Zelda heard embarrassment in his voice. "I did try to tidy up before you arrived, but I am afraid housekeeping is not my strength." "It is fine," Zelda said, and she meant it. She had lived in far worse. "I can make it nice." "Let me show you the guest room," Daniel said. He led her down a short hallway past 2 other doors. The room at the end was small but clean. A narrow bed stood against one wall, covered with a quilt that looked handmade. A simple dresser occupied the opposite wall, and a small nightstand held a kerosene lamp. The door has a lock, Daniel pointed out, showing her the simple bolt on the inside. You can secure it from the inside whenever you wish. No one will disturb you. Zelda's eyes flooded with tears again. A lock, privacy, safety, thank you, she whispered. Daniel set her bag on the bed. The washroom is the second door in the hall. There is a pump in the kitchen for water. If you need anything at all, my room is the first door. You can knock and I will hear you. He backed toward the doorway, giving her space. I usually rise at dawn, he said, but you should sleep as long as you need. You have had a long journey. What time would you like breakfast? Zelda asked. Daniel paused. You do not have to cook for me tomorrow. You should rest. I would like to, Zelda said, surprising herself. I would like to feel useful. All right, Daniel said softly. I usually eat around 6, but truly, Zelda, sleep if you need to. I can manage. He said her name like it was something precious. The sound of it in his voice made her chest ache. Good night, he said, and then he was gone, pulling the door closed behind him. Zelda stood in the center of the small room and listened to his footsteps retreat down the hall. She heard another door open and close. Then silence. Slowly, hardly daring to believe it, she reached out and slid the bolt home. The lock clicked into place with a soft, solid sound. She was alone. She was safe. No one could come through that door without her permission. Zelda sank onto the bed and buried her face in her hands. She cried harder than she had in years, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. But for the first time in her life, they were not tears of fear or pain. They were tears of relief so overwhelming she could barely breathe through them. When the storm finally passed, she wiped her eyes with Daniel's handkerchief, which she still clutched in her hand. She unpacked her few belongings and placed them carefully in the dresser. She washed her face in the basin on the nightstand. She changed into her nightgown, a thin cotton garment worn soft with age. And then she lay down on the most comfortable bed she had ever known, in a room with a locked door, in the home of a man who had shown her nothing but gentleness and respect. And she slept more deeply than she had in years. When Zelda woke, gray dawn light filtered through the window. She lay still for a moment, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then memory flooded back and she sat up quickly. What time was it? She had promised breakfast at 6. Had she overslept? She dressed hurriedly in her other dress, a faded brown calico that was only slightly less worn than yesterday's traveling outfit. She twisted her dark hair into a simple bun and pinned it at the nape of her neck. Then she unlocked the door and ventured into the hallway. The house was quiet. She found the washroom and used it quickly, then made her way to the kitchen. Through the window, she could see the sky brightening. Not quite 6 yet. Zelda surveyed the kitchen with a practiced eye. The disorder bothered her less than the potential it represented. She could work with this. She had worked with much less. She found a relatively clean skillet and some eggs in the cold box outside the back door. There was bacon wrapped in cloth, slightly dried but still good. Coffee beans in a tin on a shelf. A sack of flour, some lard. She built up the fire in the stove and set about making breakfast. The familiar motions calmed her. This she knew how to do. This was something she could control. She was just sliding eggs onto a plate when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Daniel standing in the doorway, his hair damp as if he had just washed. He wore clean work clothes and looked surprised. Good morning, he said. I thought I told you to sleep in. I wanted to cook, Zelda said. She gestured to the table where she had set 2 places. I hope this is acceptable. Daniel's expression softened. It looks wonderful, thank you. They sat down across from each other and Zelda watched nervously as Daniel took his first bite. His eyes widened. This is the best breakfast I have had in years, he said. Truly. You have a gift for cooking. Warmth spread through Zelda's chest. Praise. When was the last time someone had praised her for anything? "It is only eggs and bacon," she said. "Maybe so, but they taste like more than that when someone makes them with care," Daniel replied. He ate with obvious appreciation, and Zelda found herself eating too, actually tasting the food instead of just mechanically consuming it. "What are your plans for today?" Daniel asked as he poured them both coffee. "I thought I would clean the house," Zelda said, "if that is all right. And perhaps begin organizing the kitchen better." "You do not have to do all that in one day," Daniel said. "That is a lot of work." "I like to work," Zelda said. It was true. Work kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. Idleness had always led to trouble. "All right," Daniel said. "But please, take breaks when you need them. There is no rush." He finished his breakfast and stood, carrying his plate to the counter. "I will be working in the north pasture today, checking the fence line," he said. "I should be back around midday for dinner. If you need anything before then, my foreman Jack is usually in the barn. He is a good man. You can trust him." Zelda nodded. Daniel paused at the door. "Zelda, thank you for breakfast. It means a lot to come home to cooking like that." Then he was gone, the front door closing softly behind him. Zelda sat for a moment in the quiet kitchen, her hands wrapped around the warm coffee cup. Then she stood and rolled up her sleeves. She had work to do. The morning passed quickly. Zelda washed dishes and scoured the stove. She swept the floors and wiped down the counters. She organized the pantry, making mental notes of what supplies were running low. She found linens in a chest and washed the ones that smelled musty, hanging them on a line behind the house to dry in the spring breeze. Around mid-morning, she heard footsteps on the porch and tensed. A moment later, there was a knock on the door frame. A man stood in the doorway, older than Daniel, perhaps in his 50s, with gray-streaked hair and a weathered face. "Morning, madam," he said, removing his hat. "I am Jack Miller, the foreman here. Just wanted to introduce myself and see if you needed anything." "I am Zelda Durant," she said, keeping a careful distance between them. "Thank you, but I have everything I need." Jack nodded. "Daniel is a good man," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "Best boss I ever worked for. Fair and honest. You are in good hands here, madam." "Thank you," Zelda said again, uncertain how else to respond. Jack replaced his hat and tipped it to her. "If you need anything, just holler, I will be around." He left and Zelda returned to her work. By noon, the house looked transformed. The floors shone. The dishes were clean and put away. The windows sparkled. She made dinner from supplies she found in the pantry. Ham fried with potatoes. Bread warming in the oven from a loaf she discovered in the cold box. Green beans from a jar in the cellar. Daniel arrived exactly at midday, as he had said. His face lit up when he saw the clean house. "Zelda, this is remarkable," he said, looking around in wonder. "It has not looked this good since my mother was alive." They sat down to eat, and again Daniel praised her cooking. Zelda felt herself beginning to relax slightly in his presence. He asked her about her morning, seemed genuinely interested in her answers. He told her about the broken fence posts he had replaced and the calf he had found tangled in some brush. After dinner, Daniel insisted on washing the dishes while Zelda dried and put them away. They worked side by side at the counter, and Zelda marveled at this strange new world where men helped with household tasks. "I have some business in town tomorrow," Daniel said as they finished. "Some supplies to pick up and a meeting at the bank. Would you like to come along? You could see more of St. Joe, perhaps visit the general store and pick out anything you need." "I do not have money for shopping," Zelda said quietly. "I would provide the money," Daniel said. "You need proper dresses and whatever else you require. I should have thought of that sooner." "I could not take your money," Zelda protested. "I have not earned it." Daniel turned to face her, his expression serious. Zelda, look around this house. Look at the breakfast and dinner you made. You have more than earned anything you might need. Besides, if we are to be married, what is mine will be yours. We will share everything. If we are to be married, not when, if, still giving her a choice. I will come with you, Zelda said. Thank you. Daniel smiled, and the expression transformed his face. He was handsome, Zelda realized. Not in a pretty way, but in a way that spoke of strength and reliability. The kind of face that would age well. That afternoon, while Daniel returned to the pastures, Zelda tackled the main room. She found furniture polish and cleaned the worn sofa and chairs. She washed the windows until they gleamed. She discovered a rug rolled up in a corner and dragged it outside to beat the dust from it. She was wrestling the rug back inside when a different man appeared, younger than Jack, perhaps in his early 20s. He tipped his hat to her. "Can I help you with that, madam?" he asked. "I am Tom, one of the ranch hands." Zelda hesitated, then nodded. Tom took one end of the rug, and together they maneuvered it into place in front of the fireplace. It was a beautiful piece, woven in shades of red and gold, and it made the room look almost elegant. "Thank you," Zelda said. "My pleasure, madam," Tom said. "It is good to have a woman here again." Daniel deserves some happiness. He left before Zelda could respond. She stood in the transformed room and felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Pride, perhaps, or purpose. That evening, she made a supper of chicken and dumplings, using skills learned from watching the cook at her uncle's house during the brief periods when she had been allowed in the kitchen. Daniel ate 2 full bowls and complimented her so effusively that Zelda's cheeks grew warm. After supper, they sat in the main room. Daniel had brought in firewood, and a cheerful blaze crackled in the fireplace. He settled into one of the armchairs with a newspaper. Zelda took a seat on the sofa with some mending she had found in a basket. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and the occasional turning of newspaper pages. Zelda kept stealing glances at Daniel, trying to reconcile this gentle, considerate man with the cruel masters she had known before. "May I ask you something?" Daniel said eventually, lowering his newspaper, Zelda's hands stilled on the mending. "Of course. What was your life like in Boston? You do not have to answer if it pains you. I am just trying to understand you better." Zelda set down her sewing. The question was fair, and something in Daniel's earnest expression made her want to answer honestly. "My parents died when I was 15, she said, her voice steady despite the memories. "Cholera. I went to live with my uncle, my father's brother. He was not a kind man. He believed women were good for cooking, cleaning, and not much else. When I turned 18, he sent me to work in a textile mill. He kept my wages. I lived in a boarding house with other mill girls and sent him money every week." "That must have been very hard," Daniel said quietly. "The mill was worse than living with my uncle," Zelda continued. "The foreman was cruel, the hours were long, the work was dangerous. I saw 2 girls lose fingers to the machines. One lost her whole hand." Daniel's jaw tightened. "When my uncle died last year, I thought I would finally be free," Zelda said. "But he left debts. Creditors came looking for payment. I had nothing. I would have ended up on the streets if I had not seen the advertisement for mail-order brides in a newspaper someone left at the boarding house." "I am glad you saw that advertisement," Daniel said. "I am glad you are here." "So am I," Zelda whispered, and she realized she meant it. "I want you to know something," Daniel said. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression intense. "You are not a servant here. You are not obligated to me. If you want to marry me, I would be honored. But if you prefer to stay as you are, with your own room and your independence, that is acceptable too. And if you want to leave to try somewhere else, I will help you do that. You have choices here, Zelda. Real choices." Tears pricked at Zelda's eyes again. She blinked them back. "Why are you so kind to me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You do not know me. I could be anyone." "I believe people should be treated with decency and respect," Daniel said simply. "That is how my parents raised me. And beyond that, Zelda, I see how hard you work. I see the care you put into everything you do. I see a woman of strength and dignity who has survived things that would have broken many others. Why would I not be kind to you?" Zelda could not speak. She pressed her hand to her mouth to hold back a sob. Daniel stood and crossed to the sofa. He sat down beside her, keeping a respectful distance, and offered her his handkerchief again. "I am sorry," he said. "I keep making you cry. You keep saying things that touch my heart," Zelda managed. "I am not accustomed to it." "Then I hope you will grow accustomed," Daniel said gently, "because I intend to keep saying them." They sat together as the fire burned low, not touching, but somehow closer than Zelda had ever felt to another person. The next morning, they drove into St. Joe together. The town was busy with weekday commerce. Daniel took care of his banking business while Zelda waited in the wagon, watching the flow of people on the wooden sidewalks. When he returned, he guided the horses to the general store. Inside, the proprietor, a round man with spectacles, greeted Daniel warmly. "Good morning, Daniel. What can I do for you today?" "My wife needs some things," Daniel said, and Zelda's heart skipped at the word wife, even though it was not yet true. "Dresses, undergarments, whatever she requires. Please put it all on my account." The proprietor's wife, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Henderson, took charge of Zelda. She led her to the section of the store where ready-made dresses hung on display, along with bolts of fabric for those who preferred to sew their own. "Let us find you some proper outfits," Mrs. Henderson said. "A ranch wife needs practical clothing, but that does not mean you cannot look pretty too." Over the next hour, they selected 3 dresses in sturdy cotton. One in a deep green that Mrs. Henderson insisted brought out Zelda's hazel eyes. One in a warm brown that would not show dirt from housework. One in a soft blue for church and special occasions. They added undergarments, stockings, a warm shawl, and a new pair of boots to replace Zelda's worn-out ones. "You will need a coat for winter," Mrs. Henderson said, "but that can wait." "You choose well, dear. These will last you a good long while with proper care." When everything was wrapped and paid for, Daniel carried the packages to the wagon. He helped Zelda up to the seat, his hand warm and steady on hers. "There is one more stop I would like to make," he said. "If you are not too tired." "I am fine," Zelda said. Daniel drove to a small office building near the center of town. A sign out front read, "Reverend Samuel Morrison, Minister." Daniel saw Zelda's questioning look. "I thought perhaps we should speak with the Reverend," he said. "About marriage, if that is still something you might consider. I am not trying to rush you. I just thought it would be good for you to meet him, to understand what the ceremony would entail." Zelda's heart began to pound. Was she ready for this? Could she truly bind herself to this man, gentle though he seemed? But what was the alternative? Return to Boston and the mills? Strike out on her own with no money and no prospects? No, that was not fair. Daniel had promised to help her if she wanted to leave. This decision was not about desperation. It was about something else entirely. It was about the possibility of happiness. "All right," Zelda said. "Let us speak with the Reverend." Reverend Morrison was a kind-faced man in his 60s with white hair and gentle eyes. He welcomed them into his office and listened as Daniel explained the situation. "So you wish to marry, but you want to give Miss Durant time to be certain of her decision," the Reverend summarized. "Exactly," Daniel said. "I do not want her to feel pressured." "That is very considerate," Reverend Morrison said. He turned to Zelda. "Miss Durant, what are your thoughts on this matter?" Zelda found her voice. I am grateful for Daniel's patience. This is all very new to me, but I can say that I have seen nothing but kindness from him. I believe he would be a good husband." "High praise indeed," the Reverend said with a smile. "Marriage is a sacred bond not to be entered into lightly, but it is also a source of great joy when two people come together with mutual respect and care. I would be happy to perform the ceremony whenever you both feel ready." They talked for a while longer about the simple ceremony the Reverend would conduct. When they finally left, Zelda felt something settling in her chest, a sense of rightness. On the drive back to the ranch, Zelda gathered her courage. "Daniel," she said, "I have been thinking." "Yes." He kept his eyes on the road, giving her space to speak without the pressure of his gaze. "I would like to marry you," Zelda said, the words coming out in a rush. "If the offer still stands. I know we have only known each other 2 days, but you have shown me more kindness in that time than I have known in my entire life. I believe you are a good man. I believe I could be happy here." Daniel pulled the wagon to a stop in the middle of the road. He turned to face her, his expression awed. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Truly certain. I do not want you to feel obligated." "I am certain," Zelda said, and she was. Terrified, yes, but also more certain than she had been about anything in a very long time. Daniel's face broke into that transformative smile. "Then I would be honored to marry you, Zelda Durant, truly honored." "When?" Zelda asked. "Whenever you wish," Daniel said. "Tomorrow if you want, or a month from now, whatever feels right to you." Zelda thought about it. What was she waiting for? What would change between now and a month from now, except that she would have more time to second-guess herself? "This Sunday," she said. "If Reverend Morrison is available, that gives us a few days to prepare, but not so long that I lose my nerve." Daniel laughed, a warm, rich sound that Zelda had not heard from him before. "Sunday it is, then. We will drive back to town tomorrow and speak with the Reverend." They continued toward the ranch, and Zelda felt lighter than she had in years. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Reverend Morrison agreed to perform the ceremony on Sunday afternoon. Mrs. Henderson, when informed of the upcoming wedding, insisted on lending Zelda a proper wedding dress that had belonged to her daughter. Jack and the ranch hands were invited and promised to clean themselves up for the occasion. Zelda spent her days cooking, cleaning, and preparing the house for what would come after. She washed curtains and polished furniture. She made bread and preserves. She threw herself into the work with an energy born of nervous excitement. Daniel worked the ranch as usual, but he came in for every meal, and in the evenings, they sat together in the main room and talked. Really talked. Daniel told her about growing up on the ranch, about his parents who had loved each other deeply and modeled what a good marriage could be. He talked about his dreams for expanding the herd, for building up the ranch into something even better. Zelda talked about the books she had loved as a child, about her mother who had taught her to read and encouraged her curiosity. She talked about small dreams she had nurtured in secret, learning to ride a horse, planting a garden, maybe someday having children who would grow up knowing love and safety. "All of that can happen," Daniel said. "Every bit of it. I will teach you to ride. We will plant the biggest garden you want, and children, yes, if we are blessed with them. I would like that very much." Sunday arrived bright and clear. Zelda woke early and bathed carefully, washing her hair and letting it dry in the sunshine streaming through her window. She put on the borrowed wedding dress, a simple but beautiful gown of white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Henderson had altered it to fit Zelda's slender frame. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above the dresser, she almost did not recognize the woman staring back at her. Her eyes were bright. Her cheeks had filled out slightly after several days of regular good meals. She looked almost pretty. There was a soft knock at her door. Zelda. Are you ready? Daniel's voice, gentle as always. She opened the door and heard his sharp intake of breath. You are beautiful, he said, wonder in his voice. He wore his best clothes, dark trousers and a clean white shirt with a string tie. His hair was neatly combed, his jaw freshly shaven. He looked handsome and solid and real. Thank you, Zelda said. You look very fine as well. They drove to town together, side by side on the wagon bench. Zelda's hands trembled in her lap and Daniel noticed. Are you scared? He asked gently. A little, Zelda admitted. But not of you. More of the idea of it all, of this being real. It is real, Daniel said. And I promise you, Zelda, I will spend every day trying to make you happy. I will protect you and provide for you and respect you. This I vow. You have already vowed it, Zelda said softly. You have shown me through your actions. That is why I am not afraid of you. The ceremony was held in the small church at the edge of town. Jack and Tom were there, along with Mrs. Henderson and a few other townspeople who knew Daniel. It was a small gathering, but warm. Reverend Morrison spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through trust and mutual care. Then he asked Daniel to repeat his vows. Daniel took Zelda's hands in his and spoke clearly. I, Daniel Peterson, take you, Zelda Durant, to be my wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to be faithful and true, to provide for you and protect you, and to treat you always with the respect you deserve. This I vow before God and these witnesses. Tears streamed down Zelda's face as she repeated her own vows, her voice shaking but determined. I, Zelda Durant, take you, Daniel Peterson, to be my husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to be faithful and true, to support you and stand beside you, and to build a home with you. This I vow before God and these witnesses. Reverend Morrison pronounced them husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, he said to Daniel. Daniel looked at Zelda, a question in his eyes. Still asking permission. She nodded and he leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. His lips touched hers gently, sweetly, a kiss that promised tenderness rather than demanded passion. When they pulled apart, Zelda was crying and smiling at the same time. Daniel cupped her face in his hands and wiped her tears with his thumbs. Hello, Mrs. Peterson, he said softly. Hello, Mr. Peterson, she replied, and they both laughed. There was a small celebration at the hotel restaurant. Mrs. Henderson had arranged for a cake, and there was music from a fiddler who played lively tunes. Zelda danced with Daniel, his arm strong around her waist, guiding her through the steps. She had never danced before, and she stumbled frequently, but Daniel was patient and encouraging. You are doing wonderfully, he said in her ear as they turned. You are a natural. As evening fell, they drove back to the ranch as husband and wife. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Zelda felt both excited and terrified about what would come next. At the ranch, Daniel helped her down from the wagon. He carried her packages inside, then turned to face her in the main room. Zelda, he said seriously, I want you to know that nothing has to change tonight. I meant what I said about respecting you. You can sleep in the guest room with the lock on the door, same as always. We have all the time in the world to build toward intimacy. I will not rush you or pressure you. Zelda looked at this extraordinary man who had given her nothing but gentleness and patience. She thought about her locked door, her symbol of safety, and she realized that she did not need it anymore. Daniel himself was her safety now. I do not want to sleep in the guest room, she said softly. I want to share a room with my husband. I trust you, Daniel. His eyes widened. Are you certain? I am certain, Zelda said. I am nervous, yes, but I want to truly be your wife. Daniel took her hand and led her to his room, which was larger than the guest room and held a wide bed covered in a handmade quilt. A lamp burned low on the nightstand, casting warm light over everything. "We will go slow," Daniel promised, "and if you want to stop at any time, you just say so and we stop. Your comfort and happiness matter more than anything else. Do you understand?" "Yes," Zelda whispered. And he kept his promise. He was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure she was comfortable every step of the way. When she tensed with nervousness, he soothed her with soft words and tender touches. When pain made her gasp, he stilled and waited for her to adjust. He was everything she had never dared to hope a man could be. Afterward, she lay in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She felt changed, not just physically, but in some deeper way. She felt claimed and treasured, not possessed and used. "Are you all right?" Daniel asked, his hand stroking her hair. "I am more than all right," Zelda said. "I am happy." She felt his lips press against the top of her head. "That is all I want," he murmured, "your happiness." They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in her life, Zelda did not have nightmares. The weeks that followed established a rhythm to their married life. Zelda woke each morning to Daniel's gentle kiss before he rose to begin his work. She made breakfast while he tended to the early ranch chores. They ate together, talking about the day ahead. Then Daniel would head out to the pastures while Zelda managed the house. But it was not the same drudgery she had known before. Daniel had meant what he said about her being a partner. He asked her opinion on ranch decisions. When he needed to purchase supplies, he consulted with her about the budget. When she suggested improvements to the house, like fixing the sagging porch or adding shelves to the pantry, he implemented them immediately or showed her how to do it herself. He taught her to ride, as promised. The first time she sat on a horse, a gentle mare named Daisy, she was terrified. But Daniel walked beside her, one hand on her leg, the other on the reins, talking her through every movement. By the end of the week, she was riding on her own around the paddock, laughing with the sheer joy of it. They planted a garden together. Daniel broke the soil with a plow, and Zelda planted seeds for vegetables and herbs. She also planted flowers along the fence, bright spots of color that made her smile every time she saw them. In the evenings, they sat together and talked or read. Daniel was not an educated man in the formal sense, but he was curious and intelligent. Zelda began reading aloud to him from books she borrowed from the small library in town. He loved the adventure stories, and she loved watching his face light up as she read. Their physical intimacy grew more comfortable and natural. Daniel continued to be gentle and attentive, and Zelda found herself looking forward to the nights in his arms. She discovered that her body was capable of pleasure she had never imagined, and Daniel seemed to take as much satisfaction in her enjoyment as his own. 2 months after their wedding, Zelda realized she had not had her monthly courses. She waited another week to be sure, then told Daniel over breakfast one morning. "I think I might be with child," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of excitement and fear. Daniel's fork clattered to his plate. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, wonder. Then he was out of his chair and pulling her into his arms. "Truly?" he asked, his voice choked. "We are going to have a baby, I believe so," Zelda said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy about it?" "Happy." Daniel pulled back to look at her face. "Zelda, I am overjoyed. A child, our child. This is the best news I could imagine." He was immediately solicitous, insisting she sit down, asking if she felt well, wondering if she should see the doctor in town. "I am fine," Zelda assured him. "Women have babies all the time. I am strong. I can manage." But Daniel would not hear of her overworking herself. He hired a woman from town, a widow named Mrs. Paulson, to come help with the heavier housework. When Zelda protested, he was firm. "You are carrying our child," he said. "I will not risk your health or the baby's. Please, let Mrs. Paulson help. It will ease my mind." Mrs. Paulson turned out to be a godsend. She was a cheerful woman in her 40s who had raised 6 children of her own. She came 3 days a week to help with laundry and heavy cleaning, and she shared wisdom about pregnancy and childbirth that eased many of Zelda's anxieties. As Zelda's belly began to swell, Daniel became even more gentle and protective. He brought her wildflowers from the pastures. He rubbed her feet when they swelled. He built a cradle in the barn, working on it in the evenings, sanding the wood until it was smooth as silk. One night, about 6 months into her pregnancy, Zelda woke to find Daniel's hand resting on her belly. She opened her eyes to see him watching her with such love that it took her breath away. "Did you feel that?" she whispered. "The baby is kicking." "I felt it," Daniel said, wonder in his voice. "Our little one is strong, like their father," Zelda said. "Like their mother," Daniel countered. "You are the strongest person I know, Zelda." She took his hand and pressed it more firmly against her belly, and they lay together in the darkness, feeling their child move and dreaming about the future. The baby came on a cold January morning in 1880. Zelda's pain started just before dawn, and by the time the midwife arrived from town, they were coming hard and fast. Mrs. Paulson stayed to help while Daniel paced the main room, useless and worried. The labor was long and difficult. Zelda cried out with the pain, but she also drew on reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. She thought about everything she had survived to get to this moment. She thought about the man in the next room who loved her. She thought about the baby fighting to be born. Just after sunset, a baby's cry split the air. The midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Green, cleaned the infant and wrapped it in a soft blanket. "You have a son," she announced, placing the baby in Zelda's arms. "A healthy, beautiful boy." Zelda looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. This was her son, hers and Daniel's. "Can my husband come in?" she asked, her voice hoarse from screaming. The midwife nodded and went to the door. A moment later, Daniel burst into the room. His face was pale with worry until he saw Zelda sitting up in bed, tired but smiling, holding their son. "Is he all right? Are you all right?" Daniel asked, coming to kneel beside the bed. "We are both fine," Zelda said. "Daniel, meet your son." She handed the baby to him, and Daniel took the bundle with shaking hands. He stared down at the infant with an expression of absolute awe. "He is perfect," Daniel whispered. "Look at his little fingers. Look at his face. Zelda, he is perfect." "What should we name him?" Zelda asked. They had discussed names but had not settled on one. Daniel looked at her, then back at the baby. "I was thinking Thomas," he said, "after my father. Thomas Daniel Peterson. What do you think?" "I think it is a wonderful name," Zelda said. "Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world." The weeks after Thomas's birth were exhausting but joyful. Zelda was sore and tired, but every time she looked at her son, she felt renewed. Daniel was a devoted father from the start. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Thomas when he cried, and looked at his son with endless fascination. Mrs. Paulson came every day for the first 2 weeks to help. She taught Zelda how to nurse, how to swaddle, how to soothe a fussy baby. She cooked meals and tidied the house and generally made everything easier. As winter gave way to spring, life settled into a new normal. Thomas grew and thrived. He had Daniel's eyes and Zelda's dark hair. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and slow to fuss. On their first wedding anniversary, Daniel surprised Zelda with a gift. He led her outside to the barn and showed her a new sign he had hung over the door. Peterson Ranch, it read. ESD. 1879. Daniel, Zelda, and Thomas Peterson. "We are a family," Daniel said, putting his arm around Zelda's waist. "I wanted it official." Zelda leaned into him, her heart full. A year ago, she had stepped off a stagecoach expecting cruelty and had found kindness instead. She had expected to be used and had been cherished. She had expected loneliness and had found love. "I never thought I could be this happy," she said softly. "Neither did I," Daniel said. "You have made my life complete, Zelda. You and Thomas. I thank God every day that you answered my advertisement." "I thank God every day that you are the man you are," Zelda replied. They stood together, watching the sun set over the ranch, their son sleeping peacefully in the house behind them, and Zelda knew that she was finally, truly home. The years flowed by like water in the creek that ran through the Peterson property. Thomas grew into a sturdy, cheerful boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ways of the ranch. When he was 3, Zelda gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah. 2 years after that, another son arrived whom they called James. The ranch prospered. Daniel's hard work and Zelda's careful management of the household finances allowed them to expand their holdings. They bought more land and increased their herd. They built an addition onto the house, adding more bedrooms for the children and a proper dining room. Zelda had never been happier. Her days were full of work, yes, but it was work that mattered. She was not laboring for cruel masters but building a life for her family. Every meal she cooked fed people she loved. Every shirt she mended clothed a husband or child she treasured. Daniel continued to treat her with the same gentleness and respect he had shown from the beginning. They still sat together in the evenings, though now often with children climbing on their laps. They still talked about everything, partners in every sense of the word. When Thomas was 6, he asked Zelda about her life before the ranch. "Where did you come from, Mama?" He asked one evening as she tucked him into bed. Zelda considered how much to tell him. She settled on a simplified version of the truth. "I came from a city called Boston," she said. "Very far away from here. I came on a stagecoach because I wanted to find a better life." "And you found Papa," Thomas said with the simple logic of a child. "Yes," Zelda said, smoothing his hair. "I found your Papa and he was kind to me and we fell in love and then we had you and Sarah and James. I am very lucky." "I am glad you came from Boston," Thomas said sleepily. "Otherwise you would not be my mama." Zelda kissed his forehead. "I am glad too, sweetheart, very glad." One fall day when Zelda was 30 and Daniel was 37, a letter arrived from Boston. It was from a lawyer informing Zelda that her uncle's estate had finally been settled. The debts had been paid and there was a small inheritance remaining, $300. Zelda showed the letter to Daniel that evening. "That is wonderful," he said. "What would you like to do with it?" "I think we should put it away for the children," Zelda said. "For their education or to help them start their own lives when they are grown." "That is a fine idea," Daniel said, "but I want you to keep some for yourself too. Buy something you want, not something practical, something just for you." Zelda thought about it. "I would like to buy books," she said finally. "A whole shelf of books for our library, and maybe a new dress for church, something beautiful." "Then that is what you will do," Daniel said, pulling her into his arms. "You deserve beautiful things, Zelda. You deserve everything good." She melted into his embrace, still marveling after all these years that she had been blessed with such a man. When Zelda was 35, she had a health scare. She developed a fever and a cough that would not go away. Daniel rode to town for the doctor, who diagnosed pneumonia. For 2 weeks, Zelda lay in bed, too weak to do more than sip water and broth. Daniel was beside himself with worry. He barely left her side except to tend to the most urgent ranch business. He sponged her face with cool cloths when the fever raged. He held her when she coughed until her ribs ached. He prayed over her with a desperation that would have broken her heart if she had been well enough to fully comprehend it. Mrs. Paulson, now a permanent part of their household, managed the children and the house. The ranch hands stepped up to handle more responsibilities. Everyone rallied around the Peterson family in their time of crisis. Slowly, painfully, Zelda recovered. The fever broke. The cough eased. She regained her strength bit by bit. The first day she was able to sit up in bed and eat a real meal, Daniel wept with relief. He knelt beside the bed and buried his face in her lap. "I thought I was going to lose you," he said, his voice muffled. "I could not bear it, Zelda. I cannot imagine my life without you." Zelda stroked his hair, her own eyes wet. "I am still here," she said. "I am not going anywhere." "Promise me," Daniel said, looking up at her. "Promise me you will take better care of yourself. No more working until you are exhausted. No more skipping meals because the children need something. You matter, Zelda. Your health matters." "I promise," Zelda said. "I will try to be more careful." And she kept that promise. She learned to delegate more to Mrs. Paulson. She took time to rest when she was tired. She allowed herself to be cared for instead of always being the caretaker. The children grew. Thomas became a tall, capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Sarah was bright and curious, always reading and asking questions. James was the adventurous one, always climbing trees or exploring the creek. When Thomas was 18, he announced that he wanted to study agriculture at the new land-grant college that had opened in Columbia. Daniel and Zelda were proud and supportive, even though it meant their oldest child would be leaving home. "You will learn things that will make this ranch even better," Daniel told him. "I am proud of you, son." The day they took Thomas to the train station, Zelda cried. Her baby, her firstborn, was going out into the world, but they were happy tears, mixed with pride. She had raised a good young man, kind and hardworking like his father. Sarah announced at 15 that she wanted to be a teacher. She began studying with the school teacher in St. Joe, learning everything she could. Zelda supported this dream wholeheartedly. Education had always been important to her, and she loved that her daughter shared that value. James, at 13, was still finding his way, but he showed a talent for working with horses that suggested he might become a horse trainer or breeder. One evening, when Zelda was 43 and Daniel was 50, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The house was quiet. Thomas was away at college. Sarah was studying in her room. James was in the barn with the horses. "You ever think about that first day?" Daniel asked, taking Zelda's hand. "When you stepped off the stagecoach all the time," Zelda said. "I was so frightened. I expected you to be cruel. I thought my life would be more of the same misery I had always known." "I am sorry you had to suffer so much before you found your way here," Daniel said. "I am not," Zelda said, and she meant it. "Everything I went through made me who I am. It taught me to be strong. It taught me to appreciate kindness. It brought me to you." "I fell in love with you that first day," Daniel confessed. "When you cried because I offered you choices, when I saw how brave you were despite your fear, I knew then that I wanted to spend my life protecting that brave heart. And I fell in love with you the moment you asked me what I wanted for supper," Zelda said with a smile. "Such a small thing, but it meant everything. You saw me as a person, not a possession." "You are the best thing that ever happened to me," Daniel said. "You and our children. This life we built together. I would not change a single moment." "Neither would I," Zelda said. They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the light fade from the sky. After more than 20 years of marriage, they could still make each other's hearts beat faster with a touch or a look. The passion of youth had mellowed into something deeper and more enduring, but it had never faded. When Zelda was 48, Sarah graduated from the teaching program and accepted a position at the school in St. Joe. She boarded with Mrs. Henderson during the week and came home on weekends. She was a wonderful teacher, patient and creative, beloved by her students. James, at 18, decided he wanted to start a horse breeding operation on a corner of the Peterson land. Daniel helped him build stables and corrals, and within a year, James had developed a reputation for producing excellent working horses. Thomas returned from college with new ideas for improving the ranch's efficiency. He worked alongside Daniel, implementing crop rotation strategies and better breeding programs for the cattle. The ranch had never been more prosperous. One Sunday, the whole family gathered for dinner. Thomas had brought a young woman named Lucy from town, whom he was courting. Sarah's beau, a merchant's son named Robert, was also present. James was too focused on his horses to think about romance yet, much to his mother's amusement. Zelda looked around the table at her family. Her husband, still handsome despite the gray in his hair. Her 3 children, grown and thriving. The young people who might one day join the family. Mrs. Paulson, who had become like a member of the family herself. This was what happiness looked like. Not the absence of struggle or pain, but the presence of love strong enough to weather any storm. After dinner, Daniel pulled Zelda aside. "I have something for you," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Zelda opened it to find a delicate gold locket on a chain. "Open it," Daniel urged. Inside were 2 tiny photographs. One of Zelda and Daniel on their wedding day, taken by a traveling photographer who had been in St. Joe at the time. The other was of their 3 children as young ones. "So you can keep us close to your heart," Daniel said. "Always." Zelda's eyes filled with tears. Even after all these years, he could still surprise her with his thoughtfulness. "Thank you," she whispered. "It is perfect." He fastened the locket around her neck and she touched it, feeling the warm metal against her skin. "I love you," she said. "More than I have words to express." "I love you too," Daniel said. "From that first day until my last day, I will love you." They kissed, and it was as sweet as their first kiss in the church, as passionate as their wedding night, as comfortable as 1,000 nights since. The years continued their steady march. Thomas married Lucy, and they built a house on the northern section of the Peterson land. Within a year, they had a son, making Zelda and Daniel grandparents for the first time. The joy of holding that baby, of seeing her son as a father, was almost more than Zelda could bear. Sarah married Robert, and they stayed in St. Joe, where Sarah continued teaching and Robert managed his father's store. They had twin girls who were the delight of everyone who knew them. James eventually married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property. They combined their horse breeding operation with her family's cattle ranch, creating a successful partnership in business and in life. When Zelda was 55 and Daniel was 62, they celebrated their 36th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party at the ranch, inviting half the county. There was music and dancing and so much food the tables groaned under the weight of it. Zelda wore a beautiful blue dress that Sarah had made for her. Daniel wore a new suit and looked distinguished with his silver hair. They danced together as the sun set, and everyone watched with misty eyes, knowing they were witnessing a love story for the ages. "We have had a good life," Daniel said as they swayed to the music. "The best life," Zelda agreed. "I never imagined such happiness was possible." "Do you remember how frightened you were that first day?" Daniel asked. "I remember," Zelda said. "I thought you would be cruel. I thought I would spend my life afraid. And instead, Instead, I found safety, I found love, I found home. You gave me all those things too, Daniel said. I was so lonely before you came. I did not even realize how lonely until you filled my life with light. They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, their friends and neighbors, all the people who made up the fabric of their lives. As the party wound down and people began to leave, Zelda stood on the porch and looked out at the ranch. The house she had helped build and maintain, the gardens she had planted, the barns and corrals and fences that represented years of hard work and dedication. But more than the physical structures, she saw the life she and Daniel had created together, the love they had nurtured, the family they had raised, the legacy they would leave behind. Daniel came to stand beside her, slipping his arm around her waist in a gesture that had become second nature over the decades. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," Zelda said, and it was true. The frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach expecting cruelty had found gentleness instead. The girl who had never known kindness had spent more than 3 decades bathed in it. The orphan who had never belonged anywhere had built a home and filled it with love. The seasons continued to turn. Zelda and Daniel grew older, their hair turning white, their steps slowing. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with each passing year. When Zelda was 60, she began writing her story. She filled journal after journal with her memories, wanting to leave a record for her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She wrote about Boston and the mill. She wrote about the advertisement and the long journey west. She wrote about stepping off that stagecoach and meeting Daniel for the first time. She wrote about their courtship, brief as it was, about their wedding and their wedding night, about the birth of each child and the joys and challenges of raising them, about the illnesses and hardships they had weathered together, about the triumphs and celebrations. But mostly, she wrote about love, about how it could heal wounds and transform lives, about how one person's kindness could change everything, about how gentleness was not weakness but the greatest strength of all. When she finished, she had filled a dozen journals. She gave them to Sarah to keep safe, to pass down through the generations. "This is our story," she told her daughter, "your father's and mine. I want you all to know where you came from. I want you to know that love is worth fighting for, worth believing in, even when the world has given you every reason not to." Sarah hugged her mother tightly. "Your story is beautiful, Mama. You and Papa built something extraordinary together." "We built it with love," Zelda said simply. "That is the secret, just love." When Zelda was 68 and Daniel was 75, Daniel's health began to fail. He had worked hard his entire life and his body was finally giving out. He developed a weakness in his heart that left him short of breath and unable to do the physical labor he had always loved. Thomas and James took over the running of the ranch, and Daniel accepted this with grace, though Zelda knew it pained him to step back. One spring evening, Daniel and Zelda sat together on the porch, watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. Daniel's breathing was labored, and Zelda held his hand, her heart aching. "I am sorry," Daniel said softly. "I know this is hard for you." "Do not apologize," Zelda said fiercely. "You have given me a lifetime of happiness. Whatever time we have left, I will treasure every moment." "I have no regrets," Daniel said, "except that I will not be here as long as you deserve. You should have decades more of love and joy." "I have had more love and joy than most people experience in 10 lifetimes," Zelda said. "You gave me that, Daniel. You saved me." "You saved me too," Daniel said. "I was just existing before you arrived. You taught me what it means to truly live." They sat in silence, hands intertwined, as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. The beauty of the sunset seemed almost painful in its perfection, as if the world itself was acknowledging the preciousness of the moment. That night in the bed they had shared for nearly 4 decades, Daniel held Zelda close. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "From the moment I saw you step off that stagecoach until my last breath, I have loved you and I will love you." "And I love you," Zelda said, tears streaming down her face. "You are the best man I have ever known, the best husband, the best father, the best everything." They fell asleep in each other's arms, and when morning came, Daniel did not wake. The grief was almost unbearable. Zelda felt as if half of herself had been torn away. The man who had shown her kindness when she expected cruelty, who had loved her when she thought herself unlovable, who had been her partner and her best friend for 39 years, was gone. Her children surrounded her with love and support. Thomas stayed at the main house for weeks, managing everything so Zelda did not have to. Sarah came every day to sit with her mother. James brought his children to remind Zelda that life continued, that Daniel's legacy lived on in the family they had created together. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Daniel had been respected and loved throughout the county. Ranchers and shopkeepers, neighbors and friends, all came to pay their respects to a man who had been unfailingly kind and honest. Zelda stood at the graveside, her children on either side of her, and said her final goodbye to the love of her life. But she did not break. Daniel had taught her too well. He had shown her that she was strong, that she was capable, that she was worthy of love and happiness. She would honor his memory by continuing to live fully, by embracing the life they had built together. In the months after Daniel's death, Zelda slowly found her footing again. The grief never disappeared, but it became something she could carry. She spent time with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather. She helped Sarah in the classroom sometimes, reading to the younger students. She tended her garden and watched the seasons change. On what would have been their 40th wedding anniversary, Zelda returned to the spot where she had first met Daniel. The town had changed over the years, grown and modernized, but the mercantile still stood where it had in 1879. She stood on that spot and remembered the frightened young woman she had been. She thought about the gentle man who had asked her what she wanted for supper, such a simple question that had changed everything. She opened the locket she wore around her neck and looked at the photographs. Daniel's face, young and hopeful on their wedding day. Her children, frozen in time as babies. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for giving me a life beyond my wildest dreams." She felt a sense of peace settle over her. Daniel was gone, but what they had built together remained. Their children carried on the values they had instilled. Their grandchildren bore Daniel's kindness and Zelda's strength. The ranch prospered under Thomas's management. The family Daniel and Zelda had created continued to grow and thrive. Zelda lived another 12 years after Daniel's death. She remained active and engaged with her family, a beloved matriarch who dispensed wisdom and love in equal measure. She saw her grandchildren marry and have children of their own. She held her first great-great-grandchild when she was 78. When she finally passed, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 80, she was surrounded by 4 generations of the family she and Daniel had created. Her journals were carefully preserved, her story passed down so that no one would ever forget the mail-order bride, who arrived expecting cruelty and found gentleness instead. The Peterson Ranch continued for generations, and every person who worked that land or lived in that house knew the story of Daniel and Zelda. They knew about the cowboy who had been kind when kindness was rare, and the bride who had been brave enough to trust, despite every reason not to. Their graves lay side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a cottonwood tree Daniel had planted the year they were married. The headstones were simple, but bore an inscription that Sarah had chosen. Daniel Peterson, 1851–1926. Zelda Durant Peterson, 1858–1938. Together they built a legacy of love, and it was true. From that first moment when a frightened woman met a gentle man, through decades of partnership and devotion, they had created something that would outlast them both. They had proved that kindness could overcome cruelty, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, and that two people who chose each other could build a happiness that echoed through generations. The sun set over the Peterson ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, the same colors that had blessed Daniel and Zelda's wedding day so many years before. The wind whispered through the cottonwood tree, carrying with it the memory of vows spoken and promises kept, of a love that had transformed two lives and created a legacy that would never be forgotten in the end. It was a simple story. A woman who expected the worst of humanity met a man who gave her his best. She learned to trust. He learned that kindness was never wasted. Together, they built a life that proved love was not just possible but powerful enough to change the world, one gentle gesture at a time.